Sarah Chen smoothed her valedictorian medal against her graduation gown, the weight of it both familiar and surreal. Tomorrow she would walk across the stage at Westfield Academy, the same prestigious school that had once seemed as unreachable as the stars she used to study under when the electricity was cut off in their cramped apartment. The Chen family dinner table had never looked so abundant. Richard Morrison, her stepfather of 3 years, had spared no expense for tonight's pre-graduation celebration. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and the dining room buzzed with conversation from aunts, uncles, and family friends who had gathered to honor Sarah's achievement. Her mother, Linda, flitted nervously between the kitchen and dining room, her smile bright but strained in the way Sarah had learned to recognize. "I have to say," Richard's voice boomed over the chatter as he stood, wineglass in hand, "I'm incredibly proud of what we've accomplished here." The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. Sarah felt her stomach tighten at his choice of words. "When I came into Sarah's life 3 years ago, I knew she had potential. But potential means nothing without the right environment, the right guidance." Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Around the table, relatives nodded approvingly, murmuring their agreement. Her Aunt Marie beamed at Richard. "You've been such a blessing to this family, Richard. Sarah is so lucky to have had your influence." "It wasn't easy," Richard continued, settling into his role as the evening's honored speaker. "Sarah needed structure, discipline. I made sure she had a quiet place to study, helped her understand the importance of excellence. I connected her with the right people, made sure she understood what it takes to succeed in this world." The blood rushed to Sarah's ears. She glanced at her mother, waiting for Linda to correct him, to mention the years of studying by streetlight, the eviction notices, the nights when dinner was whatever expired food Linda could bring home from her second job at the grocery store. But Linda was staring at her plate, her knuckles white around her wineglass. "The scholarship to Westfield was really the turning point," Richard was saying. "I knew she needed to be challenged, surrounded by other high-achieving students. It's amazing what the right environment can do for a young person." Sarah's memories flashed unbidden, herself at 14, walking 3 miles to the public library because their internet had been disconnected, filling out scholarship applications by hand because they couldn't afford a computer. Her mother crying in the bathroom after another utility bill arrived, then emerging with a forced smile and a pep talk about how Sarah's education was worth every sacrifice. "Dad really turned your life around, didn't he, Sarah?" Her cousin Jenny grinned at her expectantly. The word dad hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had never called Richard that, had never been asked to. Her biological father, Marcus, had walked out when she was 10 with nothing but a muttered apology about not being cut out for this. But at least he had never pretended to be something he wasn't. "Sarah's always been driven," Linda finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even before drive needs direction," Richard interrupted smoothly, his hand finding Linda's shoulder in what looked like affection but felt like a warning. "That's what I brought to this family. Direction, stability, the resources to succeed." Sarah felt the room spinning slightly. 3 years. Richard had been in their lives for exactly 3 years, arriving after she had already clawed her way into Westfield Academy through sheer determination and a scholarship essay that had made the admissions officer cry. He had moved into their apartment, the same cramped space where Sarah had once done homework by candlelight, and within months they were in this house, this life that felt like someone else's dream. To Sarah, Richard raised his glass, and to the power of having the right support system. The toast echoed around the table, glasses clinking, voices raised in celebration. Sarah lifted her own glass mechanically, the congratulations washing over her like white noise. Across the table, her childhood friend Maya caught her eye with a concerned look. Maya remembered the old Sarah, the one who had taught herself calculus from library books and worked weekends at a laundromat to buy school supplies. As the evening wound down and relatives began sharing their own stories of Sarah's transformation, all featuring Richard as the hero who had saved her from a life of poverty, Sarah felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. Tomorrow she would stand before 500 people as valedictorian of Westfield Academy. Tomorrow she would have the microphone, the platform, the captive audience. And tomorrow she would finally tell the truth. The morning after the dinner, Sarah couldn't shake the bitter taste of Richard's words. She wandered into his home office to return a book she'd borrowed, and his laptop sat open on the mahogany desk, email notifications pinging softly. The subject line of the topmost message made her freeze. Sarah's college recommendation. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. She shouldn't look, but the sender was Dr. Williams from Westfield's admissions committee, someone she'd never met, someone Richard had apparently been corresponding with about her. The email thread revealed everything. Richard had been positioning himself as Sarah's primary benefactor and mentor for months. "I've invested significantly in Sarah's education at Westfield," one message read. "My connections in the business community have opened doors that wouldn't have been available otherwise." Another email casually mentioned putting her through private school as if he'd been paying her tuition all along. Sarah's scholarship, earned through her own essay about overcoming poverty, had been reframed as Richard's strategic investment in her potential. Her hands shook as she scrolled through more messages. Richard had been building this narrative systematically, telling colleagues at his firm that he'd rescued Sarah from a failing public school system. He'd even sent holiday cards featuring Sarah's academic achievements, with captions like "So proud of our daughter's success at Westfield Academy." The final blow came in a message to the graduation committee. Richard had requested to give a brief speech during the ceremony as the parent who made Sarah's journey possible. The response was enthusiastic. "We'd be honored to have you speak about Sarah's transformation." Sarah sank into Richard's leather chair, the betrayal crushing her chest like a physical weight. This wasn't just dinner table boasting, this was calculated erasure of her actual story. Every struggle, every late night, every sacrifice her mother had made was being rewritten to center Richard as the hero. She heard footsteps and quickly closed the laptop, but Linda appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Find what you were looking for?" her mother asked, but her tone suggested she already knew. "Did you know he was planning to speak at my graduation?" Sarah's voice came out smaller than she intended. Linda's pause was answer enough. "Sarah, honey, he just wants to be part of your success. We're a family now." "We were a family before him," Sarah said quietly. "Just you and me. And we made it." Barely, Linda whispered, and the word hung between them like a confession. "Sarah, I can't go back to that life. I won't." The truth settled over Sarah with devastating clarity. Her mother had chosen comfort over courage, Richard's version of events over Sarah's reality. In Linda's desperation for security, she had allowed her daughter's story to be stolen, rewritten, and sold to the highest bidder. Tomorrow, Richard would stand on that stage and take credit for everything Sarah had built with her own hands, unless she stopped him. Sarah spent the next 3 days in methodical preparation, treating her revenge like the research project that would define her future. As valedictorian, she had 12 minutes on that stage, 12 minutes to reclaim her story from the man who had stolen it. Her first stop was the storage unit Linda had rented during their transition to Richard's house. Boxes of their old life sat gathering dust, evidence of a reality Richard preferred to forget. Sarah photographed everything: the stack of eviction notices from their old apartment, utility bills stamped final notice in angry red letters, report cards from Sarah's middle school years with teacher comments like "exceptional student despite difficult circumstances at home." The most damning piece was a letter from their old landlord, praising Linda's work ethic despite repeated late rent payments. "Mrs. Chen's dedication to her daughter's education, even while working multiple jobs, is truly admirable," it read. The date was 6 months before Richard entered their lives. Sarah's elementary school teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, remembered everything when Sarah called. "Oh honey, you were so determined," she said over the phone. "I'll never forget you telling me you were going to be the first person in your family to go to college. You were only 9 years old, but you said it like it was already decided." Mrs. Rodriguez agreed to write a letter detailing Sarah's academic excellence from her earliest years, long before any stepfather appeared. Maya helped her dig deeper into Richard's lies. Together they found his company's newsletter from last year, featuring a profile piece where he claimed to have invested over $40,000 annually in Sarah's private education. The scholarship covered Sarah's full tuition. Richard had contributed exactly $0 to her Westfield education. "He's been dining out on your story for months," Maya said, scrolling through Richard's LinkedIn profile. "Look at this post from December. Nothing more rewarding than watching a young person flourish with the right guidance and support." The accompanying photo showed Sarah receiving a school award, with Richard prominently featured in the background. Sarah documented each lie systematically. Richard claimed to have connected Sarah with mentors in the academic community, but Sarah's relationships with her teachers were built through her own initiative and excellence. He boasted about providing a stable learning environment, but Sarah's grades had actually been highest during their most unstable years, when she was motivated by the desperate need to escape poverty. The most painful research involved her biological father Marcus. Sarah found his old social media profiles, tracking his life since he'd abandoned them. He'd remarried, had 2 more children, built the stable life he'd claimed was impossible with Linda and Sarah. For years Sarah had carried shame about his rejection, wondering if she'd been the problem. But looking at her own achievements, the scholarship earned through her essay about overcoming abandonment, the academic awards that came from her determination to prove her worth, Sarah realized Marcus's abandonment had been the catalyst, not the catastrophe. His leaving had taught her she could only rely on herself, and that lesson had made her unstoppable. Her speech began to take shape. She would start with gratitude, genuine thanks to her teachers, to Maya, to the scholarship committee who had seen her potential. She would honor her mother's sacrifices, the double shifts and the sleepless nights Linda had endured to keep them afloat. She would acknowledge the community resources that had supported them, the public library where she'd learned calculus, the free tutoring program that had prepared her for the SATs. And then, with the audience listening intently, she would methodically dismantle every lie Richard had built. She would present the evidence, not with anger, but with the calm precision of a scholar presenting research. The eviction notices would speak louder than his claims of providing stability. Mrs. Rodriguez's letter would prove her excellence predated his influence by nearly a decade. Sarah wrote and rewrote the speech, timing it precisely. She had 12 minutes to reclaim 8 years of her life. The tension in the Morrison household reached a breaking point 2 days before graduation. Sarah had made the mistake of asking one too many pointed questions. "Richard," she said over breakfast, her voice carefully casual, "when you told your colleagues you invested $40,000 in my education, were you including the scholarship amount, because technically you didn't pay? Where is this coming from?" Richard's coffee cup clinked sharply against the saucer. "Why are you suddenly so interested in the financial details?" Linda looked up from her phone, alarm flickering across her features. "Sarah honey, what's gotten into you lately? You've been so different since the family dinner." "I'm just trying to understand the story you've been telling people," Sarah replied evenly. "I want to make sure I get the facts right in my speech." The word speech hung in the air like a threat. Richard's jaw tightened. "Speaking of which, I'd like to review what you're planning to say. As your father figure, I think it's important that we coordinate our remarks." "You're not my father," Sarah said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face went white. Richard's expression transformed from surprise to something much darker. "After everything I've done for this family," he said, his voice deadly calm, "after giving you opportunities you never would have had, this is how you show gratitude." That afternoon, Linda cornered Sarah in her room. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, closing the door behind her. "Richard has been nothing but generous to us. He saved us, Sarah. Do you want to go back to eating ramen noodles and wondering if the lights will stay on? We survived without him, Mom. We were fine." "We were not fine." Linda's composure cracked. "We were drowning. Every day was a struggle, every bill was a crisis. I was one emergency away from losing everything, including you. And now you want to throw it all away because you're feeling, what? Proud? Stubborn?" The threat was clear: conform or lose everything again. Richard escalated his pressure campaign the next day. He cornered Sarah after dinner, demanding to see her speech. Sarah had anticipated this and handed him a carefully crafted decoy, bland, grateful, and full of praise for his guidance and support. He read it twice, nodding approvingly. "This is good, very appropriate. I'm proud of you for recognizing what really matters." But Richard's suspicions hadn't been fully quieted. That evening Sarah overheard him on the phone with someone from the school administration. "I'm just concerned about the length," he was saying. 12 minutes seems excessive for a high school valedictorian. Perhaps we could shorten it to 5 or 6 minutes. I think the audience would appreciate a more concise message." Sarah's blood ran cold. He was trying to cut her time, limit her platform. The final explosion came the night before graduation. Sarah was in the kitchen when she heard Richard talking to Linda in the living room, his voice carrying more clearly than he realized. "I don't care if she's your daughter," he was saying. She's ungrateful, disrespectful, and frankly, I'm tired of pretending she's some kind of miracle child. Her success is as much my doing as anyone's, and if she can't acknowledge that, maybe she doesn't deserve the opportunities I've provided. Richard, please. No, Linda. I've been patient, but I won't be made to look like a fool. If Sarah wants to bite the hand that feeds her, she can see how well she does without my support. College is expensive, even with scholarships. There are living expenses, books, all sorts of costs that scholarships don't cover. The threat was explicit now: gratitude or financial abandonment. Sarah stood in the darkened kitchen, listening to the man who had stolen her story now threatened to destroy her future. But instead of fear, she felt something crystallizing inside her, a cold, hard determination that Richard had underestimated completely. He thought he held all the power because he held the purse strings. But tomorrow Sarah would hold the microphone, and she was going to use every second of those 12 minutes, whether he liked it or not. Graduation day dawned with the kind of perfect weather that seemed designed for momentous occasions. The Westfield Academy auditorium buzzed with 500 families, faculty members, and local dignitaries settling into their seats. Sarah sat in the front row with her fellow graduates, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Richard had positioned himself strategically in the third row, his silver hair perfectly styled, his navy suit pressed to perfection. He'd spent the morning greeting other parents, introducing himself as Sarah's father, and accepting congratulations on his daughter's achievement. Linda sat beside him, her smile brittle, her eyes darting nervously toward Sarah. The ceremony proceeded with traditional pomp, awards were presented, scholarships announced, and accomplishments celebrated. When Principal Martinez introduced the guest speakers, Richard stood confidently, smoothing his tie. "We're honored today to hear from Richard Morrison," the principal announced, "whose guidance and support have been instrumental in Sarah Chen's remarkable journey to valedictorian." Sarah's fingernails dug into her palms as Richard approached the podium. He commanded the room effortlessly, his businessman's charisma filling the space. 3 years ago, Richard began, his voice carrying easily to the back of the auditorium, "I had the privilege of becoming part of Sarah's life. What I found was tremendous potential being held back by circumstance. Sarah needed more than natural intelligence, she needed opportunity, guidance, and the stability that only a complete family could provide." The audience listened intently, parents nodding with recognition of their own sacrifices for their children. "I'm proud to say that we were able to give Sarah the environment she needed to flourish," Richard continued, "a quiet place to study, access to resources, connections to mentors who could help her realize her dreams. The transformation has been remarkable to witness." Sarah watched her mother's face, searching for any sign of discomfort with these lies. Linda stared straight ahead, her expression carefully blank. Sarah's acceptance to Princeton University is a testament to what young people can achieve when they're given the proper support and encouragement. Richard concluded, "I couldn't be prouder to call her my daughter." The applause was warm and sustained. Richard returned to his seat with the satisfied air of a man who had performed exactly as expected. Sarah felt sick. "Ladies and gentlemen," Principal Martinez returned to the podium, "please welcome our valedictorian Sarah Chen." Sarah rose on unsteady legs, her prepared speech folded in her hands. The walk to the podium felt eternal. She could feel Richard's eyes on her back, confident in her compliance, certain that his threats had worked. She reached the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. Her mother's anxious expression, Richard's expectant smile. Maya's encouraging nod from the audience, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had driven 40 minutes to be here, sitting in the back row. "Thank you," Sarah began, her voice stronger than she felt. "4 years ago, when I received my scholarship to attend Westfield Academy, I wrote an essay about overcoming adversity. Today I want to share the real story behind that essay." Richard's smile faltered slightly. Linda's eyes widened. "When I was 10 years old, my biological father walked out on my mother and me. He said he wasn't cut out for the responsibility. For years I carried the shame of that abandonment, wondering what was wrong with me that made me unworthy of his love." The auditorium was completely silent now, the audience drawn in by Sarah's unexpected honesty. "My mother, Linda Chen, became both parents to me overnight. She worked double shifts at 2 different jobs just to keep us housed and fed. There were months when we chose between electricity and groceries. I did homework by candlelight more often than I care to admit." Sarah's eyes found her mother in the crowd. Linda's face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When I was 14, our landlord served us with an eviction notice. My mother didn't tell me, she didn't want me to worry about anything except my studies. I found the notice by accident, hidden under a stack of bills marked final notice. Richard was leaning forward in his seat now, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. That night I made a promise to myself and to my mother. I would earn a scholarship to the best school I could find. I would prove that poverty wasn't permanent, that abandonment wasn't destiny. I would make something of myself that no one could ever take away. Sarah pulled the first piece of evidence from her folder, a copy of her original scholarship essay, the one that had earned her place at Westfield. I applied for this scholarship entirely on my own. I wrote about growing up in a single-parent household, about studying in public libraries because we couldn't afford internet at home, about the teachers at my public middle school who stayed after hours to help me prepare for high school entrance exams. The audience was transfixed. Sarah could hear Richard's sharp intake of breath 3 rows back. That scholarship essay was dated 18 months before my mother remarried. 18 months before Richard Morrison entered our lives. My acceptance to Westfield Academy was confirmed 6 months before I ever met the man who just took credit for my achievement. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. Sarah pulled out more documents, the utility bills, the eviction notices, the letter from Mrs. Rodriguez. These are the real documents from my journey, she said, holding them up. Evidence of the struggles that shaped me, the challenges that motivated me, the community that actually supported me when I needed it most. Richard was half standing now, his face flushed red. Linda had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. I want to be very clear, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. Richard Morrison contributed exactly $0 to my education at Westfield Academy. He had no involvement in my scholarship application, no connection to my acceptance, and no influence on my academic performance. The audience was stirring now, whispers rippling through the crowd as people began to understand what they were witnessing. What Richard did provide was a comfortable life for my mother, and for that I am grateful. But comfort is not the same as accomplishment. Stability is not the same as success, and marriage is not the same as parenthood. Sarah's voice rang clear and strong across the auditorium. The truth is that adversity was my greatest teacher. My father's abandonment taught me self-reliance. Our financial struggles taught me the value of education. My mother's sacrifices taught me the meaning of love. She folded her papers carefully, her hands steady now. To my teachers who saw potential in a girl from the wrong side of town, thank you. To the scholarship committee who took a chance on me, thank you. To my mother who gave up everything so I could have everything, thank you. Sarah's eyes swept the audience one final time, deliberately skipping over Richard's furious face. And to everyone who believes that success is something that can be bought, borrowed, or claimed by association, today I reclaim my story. This achievement belongs to the little girl who studied by streetlight, to the teenager who refused to accept her circumstances as her destiny, and to every person who ever dared to dream bigger than their situation. The applause started slowly, tentatively, then built to a thunderous roar. Sarah saw Mrs. Rodriguez wiping tears from her eyes, saw Maya jumping to her feet in celebration. She saw dozens of parents looking at their own children with new understanding, recognizing something profound in what they had just witnessed. But most importantly, she saw Richard Morrison pushing his way toward the exit, his face a mask of humiliation and rage, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling around him with each clap of applause. Sarah had used every one of her 12 minutes, and she had used them to reclaim 8 years of her life. The auditorium erupted in chaos the moment Sarah stepped down from the podium. Richard had vanished through the side exit, leaving Linda sitting alone in the third row, her face buried in her hands. Parents clustered in animated conversations, their voices buzzing with shock and admiration. Sarah found herself surrounded by a crowd of well-wishers, teachers, classmates, and strangers who had been moved by her courage. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," whispered Dr. Patterson, her AP history teacher, gripping Sarah's hand. "I've been teaching for 30 years, and I will never forget this moment." Mrs. Rodriguez pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Mija, I am so proud of you. You've become exactly who I always knew you could be." Maya appeared at Sarah's elbow, grinning fiercely. "Holy shit, Sarah, sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez, but that was incredible. You just changed everything. The immediate aftermath felt surreal. Local news reporters who had come to cover a routine graduation ceremony suddenly found themselves with a much bigger story. Sarah declined interviews, but video of her speech began circulating on social media within hours. Truth at graduation started trending, with thousands sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity without recognition. The drive home was silent and tense. Linda gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles while Sarah sat in the passenger seat, still wearing her graduation gown, her valedictorian medal heavy around her neck. Richard's car wasn't in the driveway when they arrived. The confrontation came that evening. Richard returned after dark, his face thunderous with rage. Sarah was in her room packing when she heard his voice echoing through the house. She humiliated me in front of my business associates. Linda, do you understand what she's done? My reputation, my credibility, she destroyed everything in 12 minutes. Richard, please, just calm down. Calm down. Your daughter just called me a liar in front of 500 people. After everything I've given this family, this is how she repays me. Sarah heard footsteps on the stairs, then her bedroom door flew open without a knock. Richard stood in the doorway, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his tie loosened and hanging crooked. You have 24 hours to issue a public apology, he said, his voice deadly quiet. You will admit that you were emotional and exaggerated the truth. You will acknowledge my role in your success. And you will do it publicly, or you can find somewhere else to live. Sarah looked up from her suitcase, her hands steady as she folded another shirt. I already found somewhere else to live. Maya's family offered me their guest room until I leave for Princeton. You're making a mistake, Sarah. College is expensive. Even with your scholarship, you'll need support for books, living expenses, emergencies. Without my help, I'll figure it out, Sarah interrupted. I always have. Richard's face flushed red. You think you're so smart, so independent. Let's see how far that pride gets you when you're eating ramen noodles again. I've eaten ramen noodles before, Sarah replied calmly. It didn't kill me then, and it won't kill me now. The next few weeks were painful and complicated. Sarah moved in with Maya's family, who welcomed her with open arms and refused any discussion of rent or compensation. The local newspaper ran a feature story about her speech, framing it as an inspiring tale of perseverance and authenticity. The story was picked up by regional media, then national outlets. Sarah declined most interview requests, but the story took on a life of its own. Richard's business suffered subtle but significant consequences. Several clients quietly terminated their relationships with his firm, citing philosophical differences. His golf club membership committee received anonymous concerns about his character. The social ostracism wasn't complete, but it was noticeable enough to affect his standing in the community he had worked so hard to impress. Linda was caught between two impossible loyalties. For weeks she barely spoke to Sarah, choosing Richard's wounded pride over her daughter's truth. But as the initial shock wore off and the community's response became clear, overwhelmingly supportive of Sarah's courage, Linda began to see the situation differently. The turning point came 6 weeks after graduation. Linda appeared at Maya's house on a Saturday morning, her eyes red from crying. I've been thinking about what you said, she told Sarah as they sat on Maya's front porch. About how we were a family before Richard. About how we made it on our own. Sarah waited, afraid to hope. You were right, Linda whispered. We did make it, and I was so afraid of going back to struggling that I let him rewrite our story. I let him diminish what we accomplished together, what you accomplished on your own. The reconciliation was gradual, built on honest conversations about fear, survival, and the difference between gratitude and surrender. Linda didn't leave Richard immediately. That would come months later, but she stopped defending his version of events and began reclaiming her own narrative as the mother who had raised a valedictorian through sheer determination and love. Sarah left for Princeton in late August with a clarity she had never experienced before. For the first time in 3 years, her achievements belonged entirely to her. The scholarship was hers, earned through her essay about overcoming abandonment. The acceptance letter was addressed to her, based on her grades and her potential. Even her dorm room was paid for with money she had earned working summer jobs, free from any obligation or debt to Richard Morrison. On her first day of classes, Sarah's roommate asked about the viral graduation speech she'd seen online. Weren't you scared? the girl asked. Standing up there calling out your stepfather like that. Sarah considered the question carefully. She thought about the years of stolen credit, the lies that had minimized her mother's sacrifices, the threats designed to keep her silent. I was terrified, she admitted. But I realized that living with lies was scarier than telling the truth. The revenge wasn't about hurting him, it was about saving myself. The revenge had given her something more valuable than satisfaction or vindication. It had given her freedom from other people's versions of her story, freedom from gratitude she didn't owe, freedom to succeed without asterisks or qualifications. As Sarah walked across Princeton's campus toward her first college class, she carried nothing but her own ambition, her own dreams, and her own hard-won understanding that the truth, however difficult, was always worth defending. She had reclaimed her story, and now she was free to write the next chapter entirely on her own terms.